Hi, everyone out there in the web world. Welcome to Sedona International Film Festival, and we are here with Kweku Mandela, and we love your story. So thanks for coming here to Sedona and sharing it with us. Can you please just give us a little background on the film that's here this week and the message you're giving?
Sure. Came to Sedona last year to show a film that was quite close to me. It's called Funny for Is the Bull. It was a romantic comedy, and I had the great honor of meeting Mary Fisher, who's obviously a strong supporter of this film festival. And she invited me back this year to show a sneak peek of a film I made with my grandfather and 21 of my cousins in 2009 called Mandela's Children. So that's why I'm here today.
And the underlying message is really getting to the heart of what your grandfather portrayed to every generation up to this point, which is love and understanding and caring of his family. I mean, what's it like to carry on such a legacy?
I mean, I think it's interesting. I made this film knowing that I didn't want to kind of have him recite lines from his autobiography. I wanted it to be intimate. I wanted it to be something that my younger cousins could kind of share and find exciting. But I also wanted to show a human side. I think often when you're a public figure, people kind of mythicize you. And I knew that was kind of the furthest thing from what my grandfather was. As far as carrying on his legacy, I guess I'm doing that in some shape or form through telling stories, through telling, or showcasing people's voices that sometimes can't get it out there. But for me, it's really just a passion, something I love. And if it fits in with the ethos and I guess kind of the principles of my grandfather, I'm happy with that. But I've never set out to do that.
Do you think that your voice is playing a part in changing how we see South Africa today?
I would hope so, and I would say more than South Africa, and potentially how young people interact with society in this day and age. I've always been fascinated with that. Even when I was studying film in Australia, I would go out to kind of the western suburbs, which are a little bit more middle class or lower income, and I'd hang out with the kids and I'd film them kind of as social experiments, just looking at why these kids were disenfranchised from their communities and what they were trying to say through that. And so it's something I've kept going, ultimately. I mean, I love human interest stories in general, but I also love to, blow up stuff and ultimately make people laugh, So I don't want to kind of be boxed in as, this guy who makes films that are always thoughtful and whatever. Like, I enjoy making films in general. And whether that's, us chasing down terrorists in a TV show, or that's us exposing, some part of South African history that many people didn't know, ultimately.
So there are narratives in your future.
I would hope so, and I hope a big part of that is focusing on finding strong characters that are females, because I've been inspired by 3 females in my life that have, 1, made me want to do what I do, 2, made me want to be a better man. And that's my mom, that's a woman called Kathy Eldon, and that's Mary Fisher. And so I feel it's only right that I find stories that uniquely show, the strength that women have in the world.
I'd like to open it up to questions from the gallery.
I have a quick question. Obviously, this is the 20th anniversary of the Sedona International Film Festival, but you brought something up that's also very important for a 20th anniversary. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. I mean, it's the 20th anniversary of South Africa's democracy, and it's really a unique time because essentially the country's just turned to a young adult, ultimately. And we have major problems, but we've also come through some major hurdles. And I just thought it was fitting that, both these two kind of unique institutions are sharing the same anniversary at the same time.
Wow, that is breathtaking. Thank you for sharing that with everyone here. Yes?
Coming from history, do you feel more inspired knowing the legacy that you have to carry on? And how does that inspire you to inspire generations to come?
How does he inspire generations to come?
I think it's there's a lot of pressure that comes with being any individual, because we all have legacies, and I always say this to people. It's like your grandparents, your parents have expectations of you, of what they want to see you achieve. But you're the only one who can decide, you know, if you're going to live up to those or not, or if you're going to make that your own tradition, your culture, or not. I'm straddling both of those worlds, you know, and I have a unique perspective because I grew up in the States, you know, for a lot of my life, and then I went back to South Africa, which is a different environment altogether. So I try to bring that kind of fusion, I guess, into the work that I do. My younger cousin asked me a few weeks ago, you know, he said, like, how do you change the world? And I said, look, what's your obsession with, you know, changing the world? Why do you have to change the world? Why can't you change one person's world? And I think, for me, I'd be happy if that's the case. I don't need to speak to millions of people. I don't need a big audience, ultimately. If I can impact one person's life, I'd just be just as happy as if I could impact a million.
Is there another question? Glenn?
Yes, Kweku, if you could direct this to Ben. Ben, raise your hand one
Sure.
more time. I very much appreciate that. In the Q&A just recently at the Mary Fisher Theater, you were reflecting on how your family felt about you doing this film. Can you share with us a little bit about how that happened and what their reaction was?
I mean, I think, you know, I'll speak from my perspective even. Like, growing up, I always thought, I remember watching, like, In Living Color and Bill Cosby Show, and I literally thought, like, there was a small camera and they'd, you know, film these people for like half an hour and they'd wrap. That was the show, and that's what I was watching on TV. I had no, you know, kind of perspective of how much work went into films. And it was only when I must have been 4.5, I was watching Dick Tracy, and the film credits came down at the end, and I asked my dad, you know, what are those? And he said, those are all jobs. And I got this whole, you know, deeper perspective of like, oh wow, like lots of people work on these films, lots of people bring these together. So it was the same thing for my family. Like, they walked into a room, there was, you know, dozens of crew, there were lights everywhere, there were, you know, millions of dollars worth of cameras there. And they realized this is what, you know, Kweku actually does. It's not like something where he's just out with a camera and he's like, whoa, let's like film. So it really brought it home for him. And I think that's a unique thing that a lot of people in the film industry kind of deal with their families and their friends, ultimately. Sure.
Taylor?
Oh, I'm curious to know, in the panel this morning, you kind of briefly mentioned something about wanting to have leaders, like, learn to talk about things and stuff. I just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit more about that. Is that a future project you're working on?
Not really. It's a project that I'm working on right now called Beyond Right or Wrong. And it's not necessarily leaders. I think it's for everybody. In that film, we look at kind of 3 main regions around the world. The IRA movement in Northern Ireland, we look at Israel and Palestine, and we look at the Rwanda genocide. And in each case, there's a person that had an extreme tragedy perpetrated against them. So for instance, in Rwanda, a woman had 4 of her children killed. And then the guy who had perpetrated that crime ultimately was released from jail. And we had to bring those 2 together and hopefully find a place where she could learn to forgive him and he could learn to be forgiven. And I think that's a unique thing, because we deal with these conflicts on a day-to-day basis, whether it's in our families, whether it's in our classrooms, ultimately. And so I think it's something that we're trying to promote, right? Because dialogue is the only way that we're really going to change our world, right? That we're going to be more understanding, more tolerant of others, ultimately, and that we're going to learn to be better as humans.
Anyone?
I have a question.
Okay.
For aspiring filmmakers or student filmmakers, what's the best piece of advice you can give to us?
I would say, you know, as a filmmaker or as a storyteller, one of the best things I ever kind of learned, and it came from a teacher at film school. You know, he was kind of this rough Australian guy. His claim to fame was that he was the camera operator on The Matrix, and so, but he came to our classroom and he was like, you know, forget the books ultimately, like forget whatever your teachers say. The only way you learn to tell stories is by learning about human nature. And he told me to go to Grand Central Station every weekend, get on a train and just let it take me out and just see and explore the city, right? And by doing that, I got to understand like how people interact with each other, what emotions they seek, how you relate those emotions to people. And that's the most important thing when you're making a film. You have to relate it to an audience, right? So if it only makes sense to you, well then you've kind of lost the point, right, of what you're doing. And also, one thing I've learned, and it took me time, it's like, you need to be extremely patient. I have projects I started 4 years ago, and they're only coming to fruition right now. But they are coming to fruition because I've stuck with them, you know. And I think a lot of times, particularly young filmmakers, get despondent really quickly because they have this notion that they're going to come out of film school and they're instantly going to make a success of themselves. And it doesn't always work out that way. For some very special kids, it does. But for the rest of us, we just have to slog our way through and stick with it and learn more each and every day. So I would say those are kind of the two things, like understanding your environment around you and having perseverance and persistence.
You've swathed your own path. I mean, you come from a very famous grandfather. I would say that there's a lot of young people in this room, and maybe not so young people, would like to know. I want to know how you've done that, because you've done it very gracefully and in the public eye.
I've just learned to, I guess, come to terms with who I am, ultimately. And I have certain things I believe. A lot of people say to me, like, you should learn to say no more, or you should be more guarded, or whatever. And I am quite guarded, and I am quite reserved. But I'm also extremely open to meeting new people. And I allow not just my heart, but also my head to kind of guide me on the things I want to do. So if I'm passionate about something, no amount of money, no amount of fame or whatever is going to stop me from doing that. And I just think that's something that's a virtue, ultimately, that we all should carry in our lives. Find the desire to go after the things you want, right, and make them a reality. So.
I got a question. Are you starting to feel that the films nowadays are making us more aware of the world with the technology we have with the internet and everything else? I find, for me, I've broadened my horizons, what's going on with other people in other countries and people like with us. Do you see that we're going with film now, especially for independent filmmakers?
Without doubt, yeah. I mean, I think the filmmaking community in general is way more self-aware, way more aware of the impact they have on the world as storytellers, and they're moving away from the traditional kind of studio model or big production, company or house model. That's not to say that what Hollywood ultimately does is not great. Like I love to watch those films. I loved Gravity because essentially it's an idea this small, but in theory it's an idea this big, right? And it's like it moves you, it inspires you, it makes you want to make films, And I think it's the same thing when you watch a documentary like How to Survive a Plague or The Act of Killing or The Square. They all have these special kind of framing points that draw you in, right, and make you want to know more, want to do more with your kind of filmmaking as you go forward. And so I would say, yeah, definitely we're more exposed than ever because of the internet, because of the access to information that we now have. But I also think that poses problems at the same time, because we can be overexposed and we can think we know too much. So I always say to people, like, if you're doing something on subject matter, you need to engage with the people in that community and make sure that their voices are truly heard. Yeah.
We want to say thank you for spending this time with us and gracing us with your presence, because you have such a story to tell.
Thank you.
And please keep doing the good work, and feel welcome to come back to Sedona anytime.
I'm going to come back every year. I mean, even if it's for a few days. I love this festival. I think it's such a unique festival because it allows so many different people who have so many different voices to come together. And the people here truly care about the films that they're watching. They're engaged in them, which you don't always find, So.
Thank you so much.